What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 3 and Out YouTube page. I'm John Middlekauff, and we are talking football all day, every day. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends. Let's roll, baby. What is going on, everybody? How are we doing on this beautiful Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whenever you're listening and watching this? Hopefully everyone's doing good. And, I was going for a little swim in the lake today. Beautiful day. Sun was out shining. And I get out and I see a bunch of news alerts on the old cell phone that Brandon Aiyuk, the 49ers disgruntled wide receiver, has requested a trade. I said, well, this isn't the first time. Debo did it a couple years ago, way earlier in the offseason, but we'll obviously dive into that. Something else happened with the 49ers that I don't have too much information, but in terms of a rookie wide receiver, not ideal start to training camp. Caleb Williams officially assigned his rookie contract, and I want to dive into something Roger Goodell and the owners did, which I don't think gets enough credit to the business operations of the league and how it has to do with rookies. And then I wanted to do a little division preview in terms of the team in each division with the most pressure. I've been thinking about this a lot. I was going to do one of these when as like a pre-record kind of evergreen thing, but I thought, you know what, let's just do it today. So we'll dive into all that. You guys know the drill. You can fire into my Middlekauff mailbags. At John Middlekauff is the Instagram handle. Very, very easy to get a hold of. But before we dive into all the 49ers and their situation, I got to tell you about my friends, my partners, and the official ticketing app of this podcast. Because, listen, we still got summer's not even close to being over. And if you want to go do something and do something fun, I got you covered. You want to go to a comedy show, you want to go to a concert, go out, have some brewskis, take a buddy, take your wife, take your son, go enjoy yourself, take multiple people. Just use Gametime. I've said it over and over. I've been to more events in the last 2 years because of these guys. Cannot recommend them enough. Doesn't get any easier to use. We know football's right around the corner. If you want to go to a college game, I saw the SEC Media Days is going down. Saban now on TV, talking shit about Texas, which was great. But they got you covered. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. This Brandon Aiyuk thing, I got to be honest, is a little exhausting because I don't think it's actually going to go anywhere. Just like the Debo situation, he requested a trade before the draft several years ago. And what happened? Debo ended up getting a contract from the 49ers. He's still on the 49ers. And he's a pretty key piece to what they do offensively. Now, we've talked ad nauseum about Brandon Aiyuk, his fit in an offense that tends to be very run-heavy, the way they utilize a wide receiver. He is never going to get the production that some of the guys that have been paid highly. He's an excellent player. He is a winning player. You want him on your team. But because of some of the 49ers' contractual, constraints and situations, and mainly because they have another high-priced wide receiver. And listen, if they could choose from scratch, they had to pay one guy or the other today, they would pick Aiyuk over Debo. But Debo's already under contract. And part of the reason they'd have no problem getting rid of Debo if that was the scenario they were in, which they're not, is because they've added Christian McCaffrey since they paid Debo Samuel. And we all know Christian McCaffrey's the best running back in the league and, one of the most versatile chess pieces going in all of football. But I think Brandon Aiyuk is struggling with the fact that he doesn't have that much leverage. This is not the NBA. When you demand a trade, they just capitulate and you just end up on another team. And even in the NBA, when these guys are demanding trades and ultimately the team just doesn't want to deal with it, they are still getting $1.50 on the dollar. I mean, some of these trades recently, what Miles Bridges went for, or Mikal Bridges, whatever the Bridges that went to the Knicks, and the amount that the Knicks had to give up to the Nets,
and James Harden and Kevin Durant. I mean, these trades have been pretty crazy. So I think there's a pretty easy solution here. One of the Bridges, kind of a scumbag. The other one on the Knicks is high character guy. But if I'm the 49ers, they have a long history of being very tough in contract negotiations. This isn't just like max for you, here's money for you. That's not the way they've operated. Last week, Nick Bosa, who, I would say Trent Williams is their best pure player, and Nick would be 1B, even coming off what he would consider a down season, had to battle for every penny. Now, he got a lot, but he missed all of training camp and held out. And that's Nick Bosa, who is more important to the 49ers than Brandon Aiyuk. So to think that the 49ers are just going to capitulate and just give him exactly what he wants, that's not how they've ever operated. And I think here's what the 49ers, I got a little solution. What if the 49ers said, listen, Brandon, this is our final offer, whatever that is. They offered him 26. Maybe they bump it up 27. We will allow you to talk to other teams and see if you can get more money than that. But we're not just giving you away. There's a floor to this. And the floor for us even entertaining trading you, because you're under contract with us, and we plan on winning the Super Bowl this year, is we'd need a 1 and a 2. So if you could get another team to give us a first-round pick and a second-round pick, because, again, someone's going to have to overpay for you for us to consider trading you, because that's not really the way this industry works. We just give players away. Then we can have a conversation. But how is that ever going to happen? Because look at Brandon Aiyuk. He was the 27th pick in the draft. So I thought that they entertained trading him last year. They won't admit it, but got some birdies out there. Those picks that Zay Flowers went, I forget, Jordan Addison, that little stretch in the early 20s with the Ravens, with the Giants, I think they might have pulled the trigger last year. But guess what those teams decided? Why don't we just take a player who's going to be really good and under contract for a much smaller number? Deebo Samuel was a second-round pick. For 3 years, he cost them nothing. And all these teams now drafting these wide receivers, and we just saw a ton go in the top, 50 picks of the last draft. They're incredible value. If Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison or Rome Odunze or any of the guys that just got drafted relatively high become high-level Pro Bowl players, they immediately become some of the best values in the league, because we know the going rate for high-end wide receivers is 27 and above. To me, Justin Jefferson's an outlier because he's the best wide receiver in the league. But that's where it makes it really difficult. Brandon Aiyuk's like, I demand a trade. Well, to who? For what? Deebo Samuel did it too. And the Jets were kind of interested. And you know what the Jets said? We want your first, or we'll give you pick 10, but we also want like your second round pick. And I was like, what? We're not doing that. They're running a business. And I can imagine Kyle and John are kind of exhausted with this. It's their job. But let's face it, wide receivers can just be somewhat of a pain when it comes to this stuff. They really are. I mean, he demanded a meeting. Now he's demanded a trade. It's like, bro, you ain't Jerry Rice or Randy Moss. We love you. We've won a lot with you, and we plan on winning a lot more with you. And we plan on paying you. But, like, what are we doing here? What do you think the end game is here? Who out there is willing to pay and trade for you? Who is? Because I would argue, even if they got a first-round pick alone, let's say the Steelers. Okay, we'll give them $30 million a year. Here's our first-round pick. They would trade a first-round pick for him. But if you're the 49ers, I'm getting a first-round pick for a guy that was a first-round pick and has lived up to the billing. What helps me in 2024 during the season? I have a hole. And today it was came out on the waiver wire that Ricky Pearsall, the guy they drafted in the first round from Florida, the wide receivers, looks like he's going to be a pretty good player, is on the non-football injury list. And at the time of recording this, I have no clue why or what happened, but it's pretty clear when you get put on that list, it's not like he got injured training. He got injured doing something. And eventually, and maybe by the time you're listening, one of, Rap Sheet, Schefter put it out, or maybe Kyle and John are talking in the next couple of days and it gets announced what happened to him. But that's not ideal. It's not ideal at all. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's something. But this just shows you, I'll never forget when I was in the NFL, a coach told me that you can never get too arrogant with a position group, because a position group of strength, like you can have a great offensive line, right? All 5 guys, you got 3 Pro Bowlers, another 2 guys, solid starters. Well, then your right tackle tears his ACL and your left guard breaks his arm. And all of a sudden, the 6th and 7th offensive linemen on your team are forced to play. You have to sign guys off the street to fill in the practice squad and the backup spots. And all of a sudden, you're reeling a little bit. This is a sport where guys get injured a lot, which is why I understand where Brandon Aiyuk is coming from. I really do, because it's so easy for any human being, for all of us to go, it's just business. Well, it's also personal because it's your business. And in Aiyuk's, the industry he's in, his business is himself, right? Honestly, I can relate to that at a lower number rate, but like I take the podcast very personal. And when we've ever discussed business, like I take it pretty seriously. And it can become, it never has in my situation, but it happens a lot with professional athletes that they get very emotional over it. So I understand where he's coming from, but I think he feels, and this is why I think he's gotten aggressive, and he's had a lot of time on his hands. He's just scrolling social media, like put down the phone. Everything's going to be all right. Look at the core guys on your team. They have all been paid. Every core guy on the team has been paid. All of them, right? Nick Bosa, Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, Fred Warner. There is not a good player on the 49ers who hasn't been taken care of. But the 49ers don't just look at your agent and go, we're just going to bend over and you just give it to me as hard as you want. We'll just sign whatever number you throw out. Not the way they've ever operated. Tim Kawakami, my good buddy, who's been covering Barry sports for, feels like forever, is very tied in. And he talks about this over and over. Like this is Parag. He's one of the tougher negotiators in the NFL. It doesn't mean, like, since I've been following the 49ers, all their good players get paid. All of them. And a lot of them have to battle a little bit. And that's what Brandon Aiyuk is doing. And I think specifically this battle, because of the complications of the offense, given their run-heavy team, given that he's never going to be a 110-catch guy in this offense. That is not going to happen. That doesn't mean they don't need him. That doesn't mean they don't want him. But when you're breaking down the pie chart of how you pay someone, it complicates the situation. It's easy to go, listen, we have to give Nick Bosa a historic amount of money. Because ideally, every single year, that guy's going to give you 15 plus sacks and play his balls off against the run and be widely considered one of the best edge rushers and defensive linemen in general in the league. Brandon Aiyuk's a really good player. Is there any human being, if they did a list of the top 5 wide receivers, they'd list him? The top 10 wide receivers, maybe he sneaks in depending on who you're talking to. But that's the problem with this whole situation. But to think that they're just going to capitulate to his demands and just trade him away for not that much, because I do have a hard time seeing a team trade a lot. And for the 49ers, I would need a lot. If I were to trade him, which I would hesitate to do, I would not do it. But if it was clear, like he's never signing my contract and he's going to be a pain, which he hasn't really been, though a couple years ago, him and Kyle had this weird thing going on early in the season. But we've seen him. He's one of the best run blockers in the league. He's an excellent route runner. But anytime you get these situations, like, we're human beings. We all are. Coaches go through it when they have contractual situations. Players go through it, which we're seeing with Aiyuk. Now he's handled it. Deebo held in. Bosa held out. And I would imagine Aiyuk is holding out. But I have a hard time seeing them trade the guy without getting just enough. Last time they traded a really, really good player, DeForest Buckner, they got back the 13th pick in the draft. Now they fucked up that pick, but they got back the 13th pick in the draft. And it was right before the draft. So they were however they were going to use that asset, which, again, they screwed up. They should have just drafted Tristan Wirfs instead of trading back one. They got cute, and they took a guy who's no longer on their team and not a very good player in Javon Kinlaw. But even if obviously, if you got offered like 2 ones, it'd be pretty difficult not to accept. But the problem would be then you wouldn't have the guy on your team. And the 49ers are probably, there's only one team in the league that's championship or bust now, and that's the Chiefs. But they are easily in the short list of 2 or 3 teams of not getting to the Super Bowl and probably not winning it this year is going to feel like a big disappointment. You could argue it's just them and the Ravens because of how close they've been. Maybe you could throw the Eagles in there. If Joe Burrow's healthy, maybe the Bengals. But they're in that. Like, it's bust mode. You say the Bills, but like, is it really? Like, if they made it to the AFC Championship game, that would feel like a pretty good accomplishment. So this situation, it's not like you're going to open your phone tomorrow. It's going to be resolved. Like, buckle up. And maybe this is his last ditch effort to try to like spook them. They're not going to get spooked. Caleb Williams, he signed his contract today. And I don't think the league gets enough credit for fixing the disaster that was rookie contracts in the 2000s. Like when I was in college, I went to college 03 to 08, about 4.5 years, took a quarter off. But the rookie contracts, I remember by the end with the Staffords and the Sues and Matt Ryan and Jamarcus Russell historically, they were signing these historic contracts that they were immediately, depending on who was on your team, probably the highest paid guy on their football team. I mean, Jamarcus Russell held out. You got a bird in the background. Jamarcus Russell held out for into the season. Crabtree, I'm pretty sure, did the same. And those are just 2 that come to mind. Guys would hold out. The contracts were all out of whack. It was not sustainable. And honestly, it wasn't fair to the veteran players in the league. It was wacky. And in 2011, during the lockout, they changed that. And it's probably one of the best business decisions they've made in a long time because your contract's slotted. There's nothing to argue about. If you're the first pick in the draft, this is your number. Maybe we could argue over a word here or a word there in the contract, but the number's the number. It's why whenever we get these weird holdouts a week into training camp, people go, what's going on here? Like, you're not getting any more money. Maybe you argue what date the check comes in, but it's pretty set now. And I think it's smoothed the league a lot. And I think it's benefited, like in 2000, let's say this was 2007. If you're Caleb Williams, I mean, this would have been a pretty nasty contract negotiation. I would have wanted a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. And typically those played into training camp because even at the time you were talking like $50, $60 million contracts. This is 15, 18 years ago. So this has created a much more seamless transition. And I think it really, I mean, now a lot of the times, how often do you see within a couple weeks after the draft during OTAs, just second and first rounders signing? It's like, God, this is just way easier. And I'm glad this has taken place.
Forget what the calendar says. Football season is right around the corner. And that means Best Ball Week at DraftKings isn't far behind. Here's what you need to know. DraftKings Best Ball Millionaire Contest is their biggest fantasy contest ever. We're talking 15 million guaranteed prize pool with 2. That's right, 2 millionaires being crowned for the first and second place. If you're a set it and forget it type, I know I am, then Best Ball is for you. No waiver wires, no roster management, bigger rosters, so injuries will not ruin your season. Only the draft, and that's it. You're set for the year. Some of you might have heard I won $18,000 a couple weeks ago at the U.S. Open. It's an incredible high. But $15 million in prize pool, how do you beat that? Multiple millionaires crowned with winning this. I can't even imagine the high being in the mix. And like they said, no roster management. Injuries won't impact you because you got bigger rosters. Still not convinced? Check this out. This year, DraftKings is offering everyone a draft one, get one special. Your $20 entry fee scores you a bonus ticket. Get ready for Best Ball Week at DraftKings. Download the DraftKings app and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for all customers who enter the NFL Best Ball 15 Millionaire Contest to get a bonus ticket. Only during Best Ball Week, only on DraftKings.
I've been thinking about this for a while. I picked a team in each division that I thought easily has the most pressure on them. So we're going to work the AFC, then the NFC. We'll go East, South, North, West. And I just think that there's nothing like the NFL. there's nothing like the amount of pressure. And honestly, I mean, I easily could have picked probably two teams per division. The expectations are so sky high. The ramifications of failure are firings immediately. Players cut. That's the other thing. Forever it was like you can't blame the players, right? That's always been an old adage in sports because they were always making way more than the coaches, which is still true. But we see all the time these high priced players, when they fail, they just get cut and teams eat it. So, and partly because of the explosion of the league with the salary cap, it's just made it a little bit of the wild, wild west. All these teams are rich. Some of the owners are richer than others, but even the poorest owner at this point has a lot of money. So we'll start with the AFC East. This one's a BP fastball. It's the New York Jets. They are going to be under a ton of scrutiny from the moment that Monday Night Football kicks off, because anything less than a playoff berth, and I think they have the longest running playoff berth streak in the NFL. And if I'm not mistaken, it might be in all of professional team sports. Everyone's fired. It's all over. And this Aaron Rodgers experiment was a complete disaster. Some of it not totally their fault that no one knew he was going to tear his Achilles, but it was evident pretty early. Like, this offensive line was a problem, given why they revamped it this offseason. But to me, some people would say the Bills, like, they're going to win the division again. They'll be in the playoffs. Even if they lose in the second round, like, I don't know, you're going to fire a guy that's won the division 5 straight times. The Dolphins, even if they take a step back this year, they made the playoffs 2 years in a row. And I think people forget what the Dolphins and the Bills look like for a large period of time in my lifetime. Once Jim Kelly and Dan Marino called her quits, it hasn't been pretty. And the Patriots, even if they suck, everyone kind of expects that. But you could argue in just the terms of the pressure rankings, it's hard to ever get above this next team. But if you wanted to put the Jets at 1 in the entire league, I would hear you. Partly because of the fame and the resume of Aaron, what they've done to build everything around him in terms of the coordinator, in terms of signing his friends last year, in terms of how he kind of dictates the terms of their organization. Is Robert Saleh any good? I root for my bald brother, but holy shit, it's been ugly. See, in the East, every team's under a lot of pressure. Obviously, Washington, because they got a new coach and a new GM and a rookie quarterback, to me, are going to get a little bit of a soft landing zone this year. The Eagles, that thing's a pressure cooker. But I said this the other day when I was talking about, the Saquon Barkley situation. I have a hard time seeing them not win 9-10 games. I think it's borderline impossible given the talent on their roster. The Giants, you could say if they fail that heads are gonna be rolling. I said the other day, and comments, whatever. But the reason I think Joe Shane would get fired if his team sucks and Saquon Barkley has a good season is simply because if you watch that series, watch John Mara. John Mara keeps saying over and over, like, I don't like this. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable doing this. A new episode's supposed to come out, I think, tonight. In the preview, it was like, I don't know if I can sleep at night with him on the Eagles. So, like, the expectations for that team, like the Patriots, aren't very high. To me, the Cowboys have Mike McCarthy, which is kind of unheard of on the last year of his contract, and Dak Prescott, which is definitely unheard of with a guy who's had success on the last year of his contract. Now, clearly before the start of the season, that could change with Dak. Though I think if you've come this far, why not just ride it out? And listen, if you ride it out and it works, and if for the first time in 25 years they make the NFC Championship game, that's a major success, right? That would mean more than likely you won a couple playoff games. Maybe they did win the division. I have a hard time seeing them be the number 1 seed. So if you win 2 playoff games at the NFC, even if you were to lose and Dak would have played poorly, I understand extending him and extending Mike. But if they win, a lot of people are kind of down on them. I've supported them in terms of I never think they're going to suck as much as people think, because especially this year, they're just a well-run front office. They really are. I mean, they draft pretty well, and they definitely develop pretty well. And Mike's got some flaws, but he's clearly not a bad coach. Like, kind of knows what he's doing. Definitely have some holes. It's like they don't have a running back. Have you watched Mike McCarthy coach over the years? Not really big on handing the ball off. But yeah, I mean, if they were to miss the playoffs, hell, if they were to do what they did last year, have a really successful season and get beat in the first round, I think there's a decent chance Dak and McCarthy are not the quarterback and the head coach of the team at the start of the 2025 season. So whenever you're changing a guy, especially two guys you've had a lot of success with, 3 straight years, 12 wins. If I tell you right now that those two guys are gone, like that clearly would be one of the two of the biggest stories of the offseason. If Mike's fired, that means the Cowboys are looking for a new head coach, which everyone would say Bill Belichick. And if they were just to let Dak Prescott hit free agency, what the hell would the Cowboys do at quarterback? Because we've seen them, the pre-Tony Romo days, post-Troy Aikman, it can get a little weird. AFC South. This is one of those situations where you give a guy $200 million guaranteed, the player ain't getting fired. So this is a big year for Trevor Lawrence. But even if he were to play, as the kids say, mid, I don't think it matters much for him. Clearly. I mean, he's kind of on scholarship for the next couple of years. I do think Doug Peterson's coaching for his job. And I do think Trent Baalke's GMing for his job. If they miss the playoffs with how much they just invested into this guy, just given a year previously, they had won the division, they had won a playoff game. I think you could see a scenario where the Jags with, Trevor Lawrence at quarterback are looking for a head coach and a GM. And let's go around. Titans, they just have a new operation. The Texans, even if they come back to earth a little bit, those guys aren't going anywhere. And the Colts, I think they're pretty high on everybody. So even if they were to win less games they did last year, I don't think anything's changing. I think the pressure on the Jags, which is weird because no one really cares about the Jags, but just from the owner, if they miss the playoffs, I would expect the GM and the coach to be fired. The NFC South, this is a tough one because I easily could have put the Saints here because if the Saints miss the playoffs, I think Dennis Allen and Derek Carr would no longer be the coach and the quarterback of the team. But it's hard for me to expect them to make the playoffs, though I actually think I haven't decided who I'm going to pick for that division. I think the easy one is Tampa. I told myself I would never pick the Saints again after I did it last year because of Dennis Allen. But now Derek with Kubiak, they could be a sleeper, but I think this one's an easy one. It's the Falcons, given the quarterback dynamic of drafting Penix with Cousins coming off the injury. That's got a chance to get weird and weird fast. And if that thing gets weird, it's one of those teams that everyone's going to be talking about because of the quarterback dynamic with the 8th overall pick sitting behind Cousins. I saw Raheem Morris say this the other day. And listen, I love a good quote. I don't hate arrogance. If you're going to say something crazy, it's kind of entertaining. He was essentially asked in an interview why his coaching staff was so big. And he basically answered, because we plan on winning here. And when you win, people take your coaches. And we want to have coaches on the staff that are ready to fill in for those guys when they get hired. I'm sorry, like the confidence, like the bravado, like Raheem. Whenever I see him talk, God, I kind of want to hang out with this guy. Pretty bold thing to say for a squad that has won 7 games 3 years in a row. I think the Falcons internally think their team is like the Lions or the 49ers. I think deep down they think we're 11-12 win team. And I don't see it. I don't see it at all. I think this thing's could come off the rails and quick. Now, maybe Cousins is awesome, but a 36-year-old guy coming off that injury, I don't know. I mean, that's why everyone is kind of questioning Rodgers. That's a pretty major injury. And Rodgers is in a different universe than Cousins. So that team, man, they're going to be a talking point definitely early on in the season if things get weird. The AFC North, this one's hard because you can say the Ravens, given how close they've been, but Harbaugh, Lamar ain't going anywhere, and their operation pretty well entrenched. I want to say the Steelers because of their quarterback situation, but I've learned that lesson. It is pointless to talk about Mike Tomlin's job security. It's pointless. It's pointless to go on these rants to be it's time for a change. It is just a healthy time for a change. Just look at each other and go not all divorces are knockdown dragouts. Some are, I saw it with Andy Reid, Jeffrey Lurie. It was you know what? We'll just go our separate ways. I think you're a great owner. You think I'm a great coach, but this is no longer working. That was my example. But Steelers just aren't going to do that. If you tell me Mike Tomlin, the over-under, is he coaching the rest of the 2020s? I would say yes. I am no longer saying that because it's a pointless exercise to have when he's never going anywhere. Could say the Bengals, but I just think there's some unknown with Burrow. We'll have to see how healthy he is. I think it has to be the Browns. I mean, they traded all their draft picks for the quarterback, and then they gave him a historic amount of guaranteed money. And beside one half of football, he has objectively been a below average player. And a lot of people, I did my top 10 list and I left out Stefanski. And I'll be honest, I just kind of forgot about him. And if I think I had to do it again, he definitely would be in the mix. I think Kevin Stefanski is a good coach. And clearly Andrew Berry, from the roster building standpoint, their team is very, very talented. Like they have, we saw last year, Flacco came in, they have really good players at a lot of different positions. But if this guy stinks, and for a lot of last year and the previous year when he came back after the suspension, he's not that good. Is he the most reliable human being, right, on and off the field? I mean, now he's battling injuries, let alone everything that's, followed him around since the Houston days. I don't know, man. Vrabel's a consultant there. I just think, I don't know what happens. Like, how do you get rid of this guy that you're basically, you got on the books for $63 million guaranteed, or as cap hits the next 3 years, this year, 25 and 26. But I do think there's a lot of pressure specifically on Deshaun Watson, which puts pressure on the Cleveland Browns. The NFC North. I think you throw Minnesota away because the Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy situation, they're kind of going through a transitional period. I think the Packer guys, after last year, even if they were to take a step back, they haven't extended Jordan Love at the time of recording this, so they're not, locked in stone with him forever, though decent chance it could eventually happen here during training camp. But those guys aren't going anywhere. You have the Lions. I mean, Dan Campbell just got to the NFC Championship game for the first time with the organization in 30 plus years. I think it's the first time since like 1940 something they won 2 playoff games in the same year. So Dan Campbell has done a fucking remarkable job. Those guys they just got contract extensions. It's got to be the Bears because, like I said, with the Jets, the Cowboys, the pressure, just the way it's nationally and locally talked about, you could make the argument there is more hype around the Bears for a team that, hasn't been in the playoff mix than any team in the league. Because of Caleb, because of their roster, because of some of their moves, and rightfully so. I mean, they're a pretty intriguing team. Got some good defensive pieces. You add this guy that many consider a generational quarterback, and I think he has generational skills. You trade for Keenan Allen, a high-end winning player. You had another top 10 pick. You draft another sweet wide receiver. So now you got DJ Moore, Rome, and Keenan with this generational quarterback. You add DeAndre Swift. You're going, well, our offense last year at times was anemic. Even if it is average sometimes, it's going to be way better than it was last year. And we were right in all these games. So I said it from the beginning. I thought if you had any question marks on the coach, last year was the time to do it. But the Bears, I'm not comparing them to the Steelers this way, but the mom and pop way that they operate, they ideally never want to change. Like they're kind of living in the past. Know some people that have worked there, but they didn't fire him. And I'm not even saying Eberflus is that bad. We're going to find out this year. But it was pretty risky when you had the chance to kind of reset and they stayed loyal to him. If they don't make the playoffs this year, I have a hard time seeing him survive. Now, you could make the argument if he goes 9-8 and they miss it and they show a lot of progress, but is he getting a contract extension? Do they make him just coach on the last year of his contract? I think there's a ton of pressure on the Bears because if they won 7 games, which I'm pretty sure they did last year, it would feel like one of the biggest disappointments in the league. Given, and I've said this over and over, like I like Caleb Williams a lot. And I think if he can learn to play in the construct of an NFL offense while doing his ad lib ability, he's going to be a high-end quarterback in the league. But even if he becomes just a great player, like eventually becomes a consistent top 5 quarterback in the league, sometimes rookie years can be tough. And I think sometimes when you see a year like CJ Stroud, we all just think, it's really easy. It's all these top guys. That's usually not the way it works. there's usually growing pains. There's usually problems. And let's face it, like, is there a team in the league that wouldn't take D'Amico and Slowick being around a quarterback than Eberflus and who'd they hire? I guess they fired Getsy. They hired, was it Shane Waldron is their new offensive coordinator? It just could be tough. It really could. And you go through growing pains as a young player. Now, the argument for him is just like there are so many weapons. How does he fail? There are some question marks with the Bears offensive line. And last year you saw it at USC, who had it was an embarrassment for the program, an embarrassment for Lincoln Riley. I'm not comparing the Bears offensive line to what he dealt with last year, but he was running for his life. And he's a guy that can run for his life and still make plays. But that is when you make mistakes. So if they can protect him, there aren't really any excuses not to, I would say, win 10 games. And if you win 10 games and miss the playoffs, like, what are you going to do? But what if they win 8 and they miss the playoffs by a couple years or a couple games? I think you'd start hearing Mike Vrabel or someone like that. The AFC West. This was tough. Obviously, I mean, the Chiefs have internal pressure every year, but you win back-to-back Super Bowls in 3 and 5 years. Like, shit, you make Clark Hunt a lot of money. The Denver Broncos gave a coach $90 million. They let him cut Russell Wilson, but he does have a rookie quarterback this year. The Raiders, I think we all agree, how can they be good? They do not have a quarterback. So the expectations there aren't very high. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh is going to be the Chargers coach for a while. He could win 0 games this year, which would be insane, but let's just hypothetically say that happened. He ain't going to get fired. I do think, though, when you have a quarterback of this stature, and listen, you don't need to hear me praise Justin Herbert, just YouTube Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert. Listen to the way this guy talks about him. Obviously, they turned over the roster a little bit, but every time you coach a season with a quarterback in his prime who's really, really talented, and you don't make the playoffs, it's a really, really big disappointment. We talked about this on the mailbag probably earlier this week or last week. I guess it would have been earlier this week about Phillip Rivers. And I said, his career actually was a big underachievement when you look at the totality of it because of how talented he was. He had flaws. I'm not acting like he's Peyton Manning or Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, but he was a really, really good player. But his organization let him down. It really did. I mean, they made him play for guys like Mike McCoy and Anthony Lynn. It's just that can't happen. That's why they went out and got Jim Harbaugh after Brandon Staley, which was an utter embarrassment as well. I just think that, I think the Chargers are going to be pretty good, but I do think there's pressure on them. And anytime Jim Harbaugh is involved, like, part of the reason we talked a lot about the Chargers the last couple of years was specifically about Brandon Staley and just everything that surrounded that. And obviously I had sniffed him out like a rat 3 years ago. I knew right away when all the media was doing a giant circle jerk about how great he was at press conferences. Like, I was out, and I don't get them all right. Nailed that one. But Jim Harbaugh, he brings eyeballs. He brings expectation. And I think for the first time, like, the Chargers have had pressure over the last, half decade because they've had a talented roster. But when they failed, we all went, well, no shit. They had Brandon Staley. They had Anthony Lynn. Like, these guys were going to win? The trainer or the doctor poked Tyrod. They don't even know how to administer a Toradol shot. That's not the case with Jim Harbaugh. Even your floor with Jim Harbaugh. His disastrous last season in the NFL with the 49ers, he went 8-8. And I'm pretty sure he had like a bad finish. They lost like 3 of the last 5 games. I don't know, man. I just think it's going to be the Chiefs feel this because they got Andy Reid. I think the Broncos, that's what he brings. He brings a different level of expectation. And then the NFC West, to me, it's pretty simple. It's the 49ers. This might be their best chance to win the Super Bowl once they figure out this Aiyuk situation, especially if he doesn't get traded, which I don't expect him to get traded. You can't keep these rosters together forever. They're going to have to pay the quarterback more than likely next year. They're not going to have to. They want to. They're going to. And you've seen it with the Chiefs. The team that won the Super Bowl in 2019 was not the team that won the Super Bowl this February, right? We saw the Patriots go through different iterations of their team. That's part of building in the NFL with the salary cap. You keep core players, ideally your quarterback, and then you shift guys around him as time goes. And this 49er team is clearly really, really talented. And they have been knocking on the doorstep. I mean, 3 years ago, if Kwaski Tart just catches the fucking ball, they're in the Super Bowl, right? Last year, they have a lead multiple times in the Super Bowl. And the team in 2026, some of these players are not going to be there. George Kittle's 30 years old. Trent Williams is 35 years old. Deebo Samuel, his contract starts getting kind of outrageous in terms of its cap implications, right? So, like, you could see huge turnover over time. If I had to pick, Christian McCaffrey's a running back, and you just never know at those positions. So the time is now. The time was last year, and the time is going to be this year. But if they can't get it done, you might have to go through one of those situations. Like, it's usually not the Chiefs, where you just change up the roster. They just happen to have one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. I like Brock Purdy a lot, and I like him a lot more than basically the majority of people that talk about football. But, like, he does need help, and I just think there's a ton of pressure on this team. They have had some devastating losses at the end of the season. Now, luckily for them, it's been the end of the season in the NFC Championship game or the Super Bowl relative to some of these teams that can't even dream about getting that far. But their expectations have clearly changed dramatically over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think that anything less than a Super Bowl victory with this roster, you could look back. I saw with the Harbaugh teams. It was like, oh, this team's going to dominate for 7-8 years. And all of a sudden, like after 2.5, it was kind of over. Like Patrick Willis retires. Navarro Bowman's leg snapped. Just things change. Bam Davis just quits. I mean, things just change. Look how different the Bills roster is now than it was 2.5 years ago. So the 49ers have all these guys under contract. They're all high-end elite players. Some of them are going to the Hall of Fame. Trent's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think Fred Warner's definitely on that trajectory. But Christian McCaffrey's the best running back in the league. Kittle's a high-end tight end. Time's now, man. I don't really know what else to say. It's just, you got to get it done. Like, there's pressure on the Jets and the Cowboys because, like, guys are going to get fired. There's pressure on the Niners because, like, what else do we need? Right? I mean, ideally, we'd like Lane Johnson at right tackle, but fuck, this isn't Madden 25. This is real life football. Our roster, how many teams in the league can just look in the mirror and go, they're better player for player than us? It's a very short list, if any list. Maybe the Ravens could have said it last year. Maybe. But they lost in the AFC Championship game. I think top to bottom, you could have argued that the Niners roster, and in football, just because your roster is better doesn't mean you win the game. But how many guys last year on the Chiefs and the 49ers, if we just drafted the top 15 players, I'd have to go through the exercise, but I would imagine there'd be more Niners than Chiefs. Now, obviously, the Chiefs have the edge at coach and they have the edge at quarterback, which is a big deal. But I think the 49ers feel pretty good about their situation at those two spots. And it's hard to feel much better about all the other spots, right? Like, I would say the Lions would be in a similar situation, but like, they're kind of the Lions. If they just were to, and I mean that, listen, I'm a Lions guy. Like, I love their operation. My point is, if the Lions go back to the NFC Championship game and lose, it's hard for me to call that a failure. It means this franchise, which has sucked my entire life, went to back-to-back NFC Championship games. If the 49ers lost in the NFC Championship game, you'd go, how many times are you going to lose in the NFC Championship game? How many times is this going to happen? That'd be like their 4th or 5th NFC Championship loss in the last 14 years. It'd be a fucking problem. If they got back to the Super Bowl and lost, you'd be like, that's the 4th Super Bowl you've lost since 2012. Like, eventually, are we going to get it done? Or are we just kind of the early 90s Bills of this league? Because that's what they would kind of start to feel like. The early 90 Bills of the 90s, I already said that. You know what I mean. If they just can't finally get over the hump.